Hello and welcome back to another VMK in the Caligari series. In this VMK I'm going to show you how you can go in and paint your objects so you can give objects some color. Now remember, whenever you're creating objects in 3D, you can give them detail by coloring them, or you can give them detail by applying a texture. We'll work with textures in the next video, but in this video I want to show you how to apply colors onto geometry. So let's go into TrueSpace here, and I just have an empty scene with nothing in it. So let's start off with a sphere. Spheres are nice to work with because they have a lot of faces to play around with, plus they also have edges, which is something that I need when showing you smoothing. So by default everything is one color, and you'll notice it's always this grayish sort of color. To go in and apply a different color to an object, what you need to do is open the material editor. It's located here by this color palette. Click on this and you'll have a little sphere that appears on the screen. You can use this little button here to change the size of the sphere, and if you click on this area you'll notice you'll change from a sphere to a square to a sort of bent square. You can also make that selection down here using these buttons on the bottom, but I just like clicking on the actual image. Now this tool actually has a lot of functionality. You notice by default it's gray because that's the color that the object gets applied. If you wanted to give it a different color, what you need to do is click on the color button located up here, and then you get a color palette. Let's say we wanted to make it red. Well, you first select what it is you want. You can select it numerically or just using the selection with the mouse here. Now to actually apply this color to our object, you need to use the tools that are located on the side. You have this tool here which says Paint Object. As soon as you hit this, that paints that entire object the new color material that you selected. If I go and select green, hit this button, now the whole sphere is green. One thing to realize when using the material palette is whenever you have a color selected here, that is the default color. So now if I go in and create a cube, let's say we'll put it over here, you notice that the cube is also green. It's green because the current selected material is green. If I go in and make a blue selection here, and now I go in and create a cone, you notice that the cone is blue. So that's how the material works. How is it that you can go in and get rid of a material that's on a color? Well, there's a number of ways to do this. The most simple way is to right-click on this region and select Reset All. As soon as you reset all, it goes back to that gray color. Then you can go in and apply that gray color and you're back to the default setting. So let's go in here. If I wanted to change this blue one to red, we'll do that as well. If you wanted to figure out what material this guy is, there's a material picker. So select your object, and then down here we have Inspect. If you click on this, you get a little dropper symbol. Then when I go and click on an object, the material that I clicked on appears inside of the material palette. So now I know, okay, this is the green that I was using. So now if I wanted to make this cone green as well, all I would need to do is select that cone, go into the material palette, and go and paint over top of it, like so. So that's how you apply materials, remove materials, as well as inspect materials so that you can match the same color with whatever you had selected. The material palette also has inherent smoothing. What this means is the normals for our objects are calculated automatically by TrueSpace. The normals themselves are not actually saved inside of the Caligari files. This is one annoying thing whenever you start importing the Caligari files into your game engine, because you're going to have to go in and recalculate all the normals manually. However, that's not too difficult to do so long as you understand the math behind it. Lucky for you, I'll do the math for you, so it's just a matter of copying if you don't want to understand it, or you can go through and follow along to actually see how the normals work. How do the normals work inside TrueSpace? Well, there's this button located here which is labeled Auto Facet. What this means means is TrueSpace will automatically try to smooth out the surface based on a specific angle. And the angle by default, if you right click on this, is 32 degrees. So what this means is if the normal for one face as compared to another face is less than 32 degrees, then the normal is going to get smoothed out. And the smoothing works exactly the same way that it did whenever we created our geometry cylinder for our game engine. Remember, we had normals per face as well as normals per edge. The edge normals were the smooth normals of all the normals that were on adjacent faces. Well, TrueSpace does all this calculation for you, but it allows you to specify a parameter here to specify the smoothing angle. If I lower this angle to, like, let's say 6, and then apply this new material onto the cube, you notice that onto the sphere, you notice that the sphere now appears faceted. If I increase this angle, the way I'm doing this is I'm just using the left mouse button on these arrows. You can also go in here and type in a value if you like. So if I select 15, repaint over it, you notice that the top part, where the faces are actually less than 15 degrees, it appears smooth. However, the middle section, where the angle between faces is more than 15 degrees, it becomes rough. So that's the way you can control the smoothing of an object. Use this tool down here. You also, if you click and hold, you can select this button here, which is smooth, which is the equivalent of setting this to 180 degrees, which means it doesn't matter what the angle is, smooth the entire face of the object. And also, if you click with your left mouse button and drag to the very first selection here, faceted, this means the same thing as going in here and setting this to 0. If you do this with the faceted, then the sphere will look completely faceted and you can see every single face individually. So your smoothing tools are located inside of the material palette. Alright, so we have some color picking abilities. Let's say that you wanted to give your object some transparency. Well, you can do that as well. That's located underneath this button here. If you click and drag, by default it's turned off, but you also have the ability to select transparency map or plain transparency. Our game engine will only support plain transparency, so if you're going to add transparency, use this selection here. As soon as you select that guy, a new bar along the bottom here appears, and you notice by default it's turned to 1, which means that the object is not transparent. It's completely opaque. You can click and drag along this region to give it a value, or you can type in whatever number you want. So 0.5 would mean half transparent, half opaque. And I'm going to turn the smoothing back to completely smooth. Now, if I go and apply that to my sphere, you notice that I can see through the sphere and I can see the square at the back side. If I go in and decrease the transparency value, then I'm making the item more transparent so that it's easier to see through the object. So that's basically it. You go in here and you drag around, select what you want, and you get your new color. Use this tool here to paint the entire shape. Now, what if you wanted to paint your object but you didn't want to paint the whole thing? So let's just delete that sphere and the cone, and let's work here with the cube. Let's say I wanted this cube to have a different color for every single face. Well, you can do that as well. Just select your cube. Going in here, let's say I wanted to have a blue face right here. Well, instead of using this button here, which is paint that object, you have this button here, which is paint over existing material. If you click and drag this guy, you can have a tool here, which is paint face. Select this guy, and now you have a paintbrush tool. If I click anywhere using this tool, then only the selected face is painted over top. So you can go in here and quickly paint over your faces that you want to use. Now notice something very interesting here. The edges appear very dark along one side and very bright along another side. The reason for this is because I've chosen to use smooth here, which smooth isn't very good for a cube because a cube actually has sharp edges. Instead, you want to use auto facet or faceted faces for a cube. So I'm just going to select this, bring this down to 32, which is the default. And now when I go and paint over the object, the shading will actually appear a lot better. And we'll put a blue face over here. Okay? So now you'll notice that the faces look a lot more realistic to what we were expecting. Let's make a yellow face over here. Now, notice that this face, which is, let's make it bright yellow, I painted here, doesn't really look bright yellow. Why is that? Well, in TrueSpace, whatever you see in this window is always rendered with respect to our camera as well as with respect to our lights. Now, lights I haven't discussed in detail because we're not going to be using the TrueSpace lights at all. But it is something you have to be aware of when you are making models in 3D. If you move your image over here, you notice that by default, whenever you create a new scene, TrueSpace sticks two lights into the scene. You have this one directional light that's kind of pointing downward, and another one that's kind of pointing straight in this way. So all the faces that are pointing away from these two light sources will appear black. And you'll notice that the back face here appears black, even though it's not painted black. So if you wanted to see what your object looks like, you do need to rotate it around. You notice, okay, that side really is gray, and that side really is bright yellow. It's just because of that lighting. If you wanted to go in and change the location of these light sources, you can do that as well. You can just click on your lights and then use their tools here to change the angle as well as the position of these lights. You can manipulate them just like regular tools. So now I've placed my directional light over here. If I select my cube, you can see it's working fine. I can select my other light source here, move it over maybe here, and then rotate it like so. So now I have two light sources pointing from sort of both sides. So you can do that as well. But what I recommend, I just find it much easier to rotate the object around and keep your light sources fixed at one location. You can also add in other light sources. There's a whole section here of lights, which I'm not sure if GameSpace has these or not. So just to play safe, I'm not going to really talk about them in detail. But if you do have these in GameSpace, you can drop in light sources and they will appear in your scene. Just be aware, the more light sources you put into your scene, the slower your computer is going to run because it has to calculate all the lighting calculations for your objects. So I strongly recommend stick with the default two, which are always placed in your scene, and just manipulate your object around like so to see what it is you're painting. Okay? I think that's it. Oh, if you don't have your number palette showing up here, the way you get it is there's a little triangle located at the top here, which you can use to expand or contract this guy. Okay, so that's how you apply simple colors to your objects. Let's go in and delete that cube, and we'll just reset this back to the default gray color. We'll also just start up a new scene so that my views are reset back to normal with the lights back in the center. Now, let's go in and create another cube. I'll make it relatively big. And let's just move it around this way so that the lighting is more optimal. Okay, so we've seen the colors. Now, you'll remember inside OpenGL you have diffuse color, emissive color, specular color, and ambient color. Those are the four colors you have to work with. This color picker here really is your ambient or your diffuse color. It's really more of a diffuse color for your material. So how do you go in and specify your other values? Well, what you can do is you can use these buttons here to bring up a bump map, which we're not going to use, or you can also use this button here to select your reflectance. Your reflectance is how we're going to be saving all these other color parameters. So if you want, for instance, to see your color and your reflectance at the same time, you can use this button here. You just click and drag it outward, and you see you get your color, your bump, and your reflectance. The one you don't want is your bump, so we'll just close that off, leaving with the color and your reflectance. So if you wanted to have a green material, but then change around the specular color or emissive color, things like that, what you do is use these controls here. Again, you can just click and drag to make a selection, and you'll notice that automatically in this section here, everything gets updated. Now, TrueSpace, what it calls luminance, in OpenGL we call emissive color. So this is how much of the object will sort of look like it's glowing. So we can make that selection here, or if you want a numerical entry, you can just right click and then you get luminance value here that you can just type in. So 0.5. Your diffuse color, you can manipulate using this slider here, and diffuse is going to be the same thing as ambient color. So you can change this to be whatever value you want, and it's always a function of your original color. So if you select green, you can't make diffuse to be red. They have to be both green, because this is just a multiplying factor for your actual color values that you've selected here. Shine is the shininess value that we have inside OpenGL, so you can change that around here. And you'll notice that the value ranges from 0 to 1. However, in OpenGL, it ranges, I think, from 0 to 128. So we're going to apply a scaling factor later on, but for now, just realize that this goes from 0 to 1. And the last thing is your specular color. You have a range slider, which we're not really going to use, but you have your specular color selection picker down here. So if you click on this guy, you get another color selection picker. So you can select, I want to have a red specular color on a green material. So let's try using this. This isn't going to be very visible with a cube because a cube will not have very much specular color. So let's delete the cube and use a sphere instead. So here we go. We have a green cube with red specular color, and we don't really see the red coming up at all. But let's see, if we do a render, it sort of does have a reddish tinge to the green cube. But there you go. You can select your settings here. Oh, it's probably because we have some luminance values. Let's just crank this down a little. Apply that and see if the red shows up. No, that doesn't really help too much. But you have your ability to make selections here. So specular color, located under reflectance, shininess, which is right here, diffuse color, specify here your emissive color is equivalent to luminance, specify here, and then the general color you just use with the color picker over here. Again, if you have the color channel or all of them closed for that matter, you can make a selection using these buttons here. If you want multiple selections, just click and drag click and drag outwards, and then delete the bump because you don't need a bump. We're not going to support bump mapping in our game engine for now. Okay, so that's basically all I wanted to show you about the material editor. It's very easy to use. Be aware that your material that you're using is always the default value. So whenever you select this guy here, go in and create a new object, that object takes on the material that you just selected. In the next video, I'll show you how to apply textures onto models.